The story of Joshua and the conquest of Jericho is one of the most impressive and profound lessons on faith and obedience found in the Bible. Joshua was a fearless leader, but what truly set him apart was his absolute trust in God. When God tasked him with taking the city of Jericho, he gave Joshua an instruction that, at first glance, seemed insane. March around the city in silence for 6 days. Have you ever stopped to think? How could silence bring down such impenetrable walls? Often, in the rush of everyday life, we are quick to act on impulse, to speak without thinking, to let our emotions guide us. But this story teaches us something profound. There is a time for everything, and the time for silence is essential. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 7, Solomon reminds us that there is a time to be silent and a time to speak. Knowing how to discern these moments can transform our lives. When faced with challenges, our first reaction is usually to speak, to express our concerns, to try to solve everything with our own words. But the Bible teaches us that sometimes the answer lies in silence. Psalm 46, verse 10 invites us to be still and know that I am God. This verse reminds us that even when we don't understand, God is working on our behalf. Silence, when practiced with intention, draws us closer to God. Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15 says, "In repentance and rest is your salvation. In quietness and trust is your strength." True strength does not come from agitation, but from tranquility and trust in God. When we are silent, we allow God to speak, to guide us, and to strengthen us. The march around Jericho was not a walk of inactivity, but a walk of preparation. Joshua and his people were preparing for the great victory that God had promised. Likewise, in our moments of silence, God is preparing us for something greater. It is in silence that our faith is refined and our character is shaped. In day-to-day life, how often do we find ourselves in situations where speaking might make things worse? The Bible advises us in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 28, "Even a fool is considered wise if he keeps silent." This verse reminds us that sometimes silence is the wisest answer we can give, especially in moments of conflict or tension. Jesus, on several occasions, also demonstrated the power of silence. When he was accused and taken to trial, he remained silent before his accusers. Matthew chapter 26, verse 63. This silence was not a sign of weakness but of strength, self-control, and deep trust in God's plan. He knew that his mission did not depend on words, but on actions aligned with the Father's will. Silence also protects us from acting hastily. In James chapter 1, verse 19, we are instructed to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. How often has a poorly placed word or an impulsive reaction led us into problems that could have been avoided with a little silence and reflection? Silence prepares us for the right action at the right moment. Joshua and his army marched in silence for 6 days, but on the 7th day, God gave the order to shout. That shout was the manifestation of the faith that had been cultivated in silence. In our lives, there are moments when silence is necessary so that we can act with clarity and purpose at the right time. In Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, Paul encourages us not to be anxious about anything, but to present our requests to God in prayer and petition with thanksgiving. Often, this peace is found in the silence of our prayers, when we quiet ourselves before God and hand over our anxieties to Him. Silence also helps us avoid sin. In James chapter 3, verse 2, we read that we all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. Often, silence is the best way to avoid saying something that might hurt or harm others. When Joshua and the people of Israel marched in silence around Jericho, they didn't know exactly how God would bring down the walls, but they trusted and obeyed. In our lives, we may not fully understand God's plans, but we are called to trust Him and obey in silence, knowing that He is in control of all things. Silence is also a way to demonstrate humility. In Micah chapter 6, verse 8, God teaches us to act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Silence, in moments of conflict or decision, helps us recognize that we do not have all the answers and that we need to depend on God to guide us. In our society, silence is often seen as weakness or passivity, but from a biblical perspective, silence is a demonstration of strength and self-control. As we read in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." True power lies in controlling our words and reactions. In moments of anguish, silence can be the best form of prayer. In Romans chapter 8, verse 26, Paul reminds us that the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. When we have no words, God's Spirit intercedes on our behalf, and that silence becomes a powerful prayer. In the end, silence is an expression of faith. When Joshua marched in silence around Jericho, he was demonstrating an unshakable faith in God. In our walk, we need to learn to trust God, even when He calls us to silence. As it is written in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 30, "By faith the walls of Jericho fell, after the army had marched around them for 7 days." May we, like Joshua, trust in God and wait in silence for the victory He has already prepared for us. Today, I want to invite you to reflect on the power of silence. Think about the story of Joshua and Jericho. Imagine what must have gone through the minds of those people as they marched in silence around the towering walls. Every step taken in obedience was an act of faith, a silent declaration of trust in God. They didn't need to shout, complain, or question. They just trusted. And it was in that silence, in that stillness, that victory was forged. How many times in our own lives do we face walls that seem insurmountable? Walls of doubt, fear, problems that seem to have no solution. And in these moments, we are tempted to speak, to complain, to try to solve everything with our own strength. But God calls us to a different posture. He calls us to silence, to the silent trust that says, "I know God is in control." Let silence be a place of encounter with God. Let it be the space where your faith is renewed, where your heart is restored, and where you find the peace that only He can give. Because in the end, it's not about how much we say or do, but about how much we trust in Him. And that trust, cultivated in silence, is what leads us to true victory. May this message touch your heart and lead you to experience the transformative power of silence in your life. May you feel God's presence in a tangible way, even in the most silent moments. And may you, in due time, see the walls fall, not by your strength, but by the mighty hand of God. If this message touched your heart and you wish to continue receiving words of faith and encouragement, I invite you to subscribe to our channel. Here, we share messages that strengthen the soul, reflections that transform lives, and powerful prayers that draw you closer to God. Don't miss the opportunity to grow spiritually with us. Click subscribe and turn on the notification bell to receive the next messages. God has great things prepared for you.